Welcome to episode 5 of Rap Beer. I'm John Kretschmer along with Scott Davis.
Hello.
And today we have an amazing human being, the Reverend Tom Jones, a construction coordinator who's a member of the tribe, hails from Shelby, and he's known just blah, 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 blah.
Hello, welcome to episode 5 of Rap Beer. I am Scott Davis along with my co-host John Kretschmer, and we've got an episode that's going to be a lot of fun.
An amazing human being. I call him the Reverend Jones. Tom Jones Jr., a construction coordinator, a member of the tribe. And however, he's got a new title now, the Doctor.
And this episode is The Doctor is In.
Tom Jones Jr.,
Yes.
welcome to Rap Beer.
Okay. Happy to be here.
And here we are in CineSpace Wilmington in the screening room.
Nice.
In my understanding, you are familiar with this screening room.
I am. I was on the crew that built this screening room in 1984, spring of 84,
Wow.
when shortly after I was hired on to work at that time, De Laurentiis, I think it was North Carolina Film Corporation at the time.
North Carolina Film Corporation
Yeah.
was the first shingle, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
You know, I have to think as transient as our business has become, that how permanent that may have felt, you know, that you're building a proper screening room,
Right.
building a studio, that maybe that meant that, you know, this may go for a while. This may be had you moved here?
We moved here for the industry. Yeah.
Right. And before or after you started hammering nails here in the screening room?
We moved here probably 2 weeks before I started work.
And so you came down with the promise of a job. And,
I came down with the promise of a job, yeah.
you know, so here's another thing. It's 40 years later. You know, we're measuring this in decades.
Yeah,
Four
for sure.
decades
Yeah.
later. And,
Yeah.
So that's what kind of circled it for me
It'll be 40 years in April for me.
in September. So, you know, Tom Jones, as a construction coordinator, you certainly have a storied career. I understand you're dabbling in front of the camera with some work.
Well, that was purely by accident. But, yeah, I was doing the construction on the second launching of the Halloween franchise. This one was just called Halloween down in Charleston, and we were in a production meeting. And the first AD, he leaned forward and looked at me and he says, "Hey," I pointed to myself. I said, "Me?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Take your glasses off." And I said, "Okay." So I took my glasses off. We hadn't even met yet. This was like in the very beginning. So I took my glasses off. And he says, "Give me a look." So I gave him a look.
You just gave me a look.
I gave him the stink eye, and he punched David Green, the director, and he says, "Hey, we've got our Loomis right here." And David said, "Yeah, that'll work." So in the original script, the story opened with a flashback to the night of the original Halloween, 1978, and it was going to pick up where Loomis shot Michael Myers 6 times, and he falls off the balcony. They rush to the balcony, and the body's gone. And then the story would pick up, 40 years later or whatever. But that was not that film, budget-wise. So there was a rewrite. They dropped all of that. That would have required a sound stage, rigging, special effects, all stunts, the whole thing. And that budget was only, I think, $14 million.
Gotcha.
And it was it wasn't in the cards.
I remember a producer said that one time to the Pate brothers. You know, lads, you got to write yourself out of this one.
Yeah. So anyway, they took that scene out. They filled it in with some other, to get the page count and everything. And that film grossed $200 million domestic.
Oof.
On a $14 million production budget. And so they knew they had the firepower to pay for a flashback sequence on the second iteration, Halloween Kills. So they wrote an entire vignette of, we did the neighborhood in Carolina Place, 1978, we built a neighborhood on stage 10 with 6 houses, street, sidewalk. We
Wow.
sculpted the same trees that were in Pasadena, California on the sidewalk outside the original Halloween house, like verbatim, copied
Holy
all
cow.
of that stuff. And then beyond the Myers house, we copied the houses on each side of it in Pasadena. And then across the street, we used houses in Carolina Place that matched what we were shooting as the across the street in Carolina.
So not only did you have a role in the movie, you built the movie as well.
We built the movie,
Holy cow.
and my one day of work on the film was a Friday night, and we were going 7 days a week on construction because we had a fairly short prep time, and it was a very short shooting schedule, so it was compressed. And so I was actually running a crew out in Veterans Park near Ashley High School that day. And so I left that crew about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I went home. I laid down for a couple hours, got up, took a shower. I had my call at 6 o'clock here for hair and makeup. And at 10 o'clock, they dropped me off at stage 10, and I immediately went in front of the camera for a scene. And then throughout the night, I was background in several scenes, and I had like sort of the focal point in a couple of scenes. And then we wrapped about 7, went to hair and makeup, got all the stuff taken off, went home, had 2 shots of tequila. I took a nap, and I came back to work.
Went back to work.
Yeah, went back to work.
Running a construction crew.
Run a construction crew.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And how did that experience turn out for you?
Well, it turned out great. It was purely serendipitous. Attila, the first AD, it was his doing, so I blame him to this day.
Right.
But, it worked out really good. David encouraged me to join Screen Actors Guild, so I did that. And the one day I worked paid for my Screen Actors Guild dues, membership, the whole thing. So, and I've gotten a couple of nice residual checks off of it.
That's great.
For what that's worth. And as a totally unforeseen byproduct, the effects makeup guy who worked on it, a guy named Chris Nelson, contacted me and asked me if I'd be interested in doing horror conventions. And
horror conventions.
Yeah. And his friend Shawn Clark is an agent for horror conventions. So he had Shawn get up with me, and we talked. And he says, "Would you be interested? No strings attached." He says, "Your all expenses paid. You'll show up at a horror convention. You'll sign autographs. You'll get paid in cash. And the worst thing will happen is you'll go home with a few bucks in your pocket."
Good heavens.
Yeah. I said, "Sure, go ahead." So so far I've done 6 of them over the last 2 years. And, some have been better than others, but it's just a freaky kind of a whole subculture. I mean, people know they're there, but the horror fans turn out in drove, and they are like so gracious and sweet and just genuinely into their art form. And so anyway, that's been a fun offshoot of that whole thing. So I'm Dr. Loomis.
Dr. Loomis, amazing.
Yeah.
And we're so honored to have the presence of Dr. Loomis here on Rap Beer.
Well, I think Donald Pleasance expired in like '96, so he was not around for anything after that. And 4 hours of hair and makeup, and I bore a somewhat of a striking resemblance. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. I want to talk about The Abyss a little bit.
Okay.
We just saw a screening of the 4K remix on
Right.
that. What'd you think?
I thought it held up pretty good. The still, for me, the weak link in the underwater footage is there's no life. Except for those crabs coming out of that seaman's mouth when they're in the within the submarine.
Right.
There's very little flora, fauna, or
Except for those little plants that Vernon
Yeah,
Harrell made.
Yeah, the little plants that wave back and forth, but
Right.
there are no fish.
Copy that.
Which understand, you're in whatever 80 feet of water that's been chlorinated to death and heated, and that would have been an impossibility.
And of course, computer graphics were brand new then.
Yeah,
and
at that time they couldn't have.
do you remember
pulled that off.
I remember the day I was hired, they started animating the water creature, and it ran for 8 months.
Right. Yeah.
To render that.
Yeah.
Another thing from the 4K that I saw in just a difference of the improvement of the image was Captain Kretschmer, the
Yeah.
U.S. Montana. In the
Yeah.
previous version, I would tell people, if you look really close when he stands at the chart, you can read Kretschmer.
Right.
And lo and behold, in this 4K, it's Kretschmer. Oop, Kretschmer's drowned, So I
Yeah.
got like 5 plugs
Yeah.
in
No,
the
it
4K
was
version.
really an improvement.
One of the very first, I was hired in California to work on the Abyss. And I drove back across the country and loaded up my truck and drove out to Gaffney, went down
Right.
the winding road. And I was the very first person to show up at the gate. And Earl Owensby was manning the gate.
Right. Yeah. A cottage industry for him. Yeah.
And his little wiener dog. But I do remember about a week later or 2 weeks later, you showed up and you were the very first familiar face that I saw.
I was the
in
first
Gaffney.
construction person
Right.
hired. And I had contacted Ken Paddington, the first construction coordinator, about interviewing. And so we set it up. And my in-laws lived in Shelby. So we'd driven down there for the weekend. And I went in on Saturday morning to Gaffney, to the Cherokee site for the interview. And so we met and talked. And, after an hour or so, he says, you've got the job. And I said, okay. And he says, we need a crew to start Tuesday. And, they had been, the art department had been working for some time. So they had a lot of drawings developed. And a lot of the conceptual design, a lot of that had already been done.
I saw all that in L.A. when I interviewed.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
So I didn't leave until 5:30 that afternoon. I spent the day on the phone, calling, getting whoever I could get to show up for Tuesday to start work.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
My youngest daughter was a week old, and she was born on the 8th of May, and I think I started on the 16th or 17th of May. So
Wow.
that was a tough one, but it was timely for me career-widely.
where did you stay? Did you stay with your family in Shelby?
Yeah, I stayed with my in-laws in Shelby. Yeah,
Right,
it worked
yeah.
out good. They were early risers, and we had to be out good.
That's great. When I got hired, things worked out in my favor because I had done a movie here with Michael Stringer from The Hip.
From the Hip. Yeah, I worked on that.
And when I interviewed with Les Dilly, he looked at my resume and said, "Michael Stringer? You've worked with Michael Stringer?"
Yeah.
And I was in from then. Not only that, we'd done the screen test for Leviathan,
Right, that was here.
and Ron Cobb
Yep.
designed that, and I was riding around in the van with Ron Cobb and Bill Skinner, and when North Carolina kid walked into the art department there to interview, Ron's in the back of the room and he goes,
Yeah.
"John,"
Yeah.
and everyone else is just cowering in his shadow.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Who's this kid from North Carolina? Knows Ron Cobb.
Yeah.
So
Better book him. Yeah.
So by the time I got to Charlie Scores to get hired, he says, "Tell me what you want," And I said, "Well, I want my crew."
Yeah.
And so I got to bring my whole crew from Wilmington.
Yeah.
And I remember you and I run around, but what a crazy thing! It was about 8 months. I remember we in the set dressing part we marked the passage of time by how many times banana pudding showed up on the craft service truck. I think the show was about 8 banana puddings long.
Yeah. Well, I was there for almost 9 months to the day. I came back after Christmas, and I got a call from a guy named Cliff Werber, who was the attorney for Fox, and he had me meet him out at the property. And he had gone to a sign shop and had all of these vinyl signs made that said "Property of 20th Century Fox." and we spent a couple of days putting those signs all over everything that was left behind,
Right.
including deep core.
Right.
And then that was my kiss off there.
Amazing.
We started high school in the 8th grade, and then we moved to Shelby after the 8th grade, and that's when I became a North Carolinian. And so I always referred to that as my hometown because we lived there, I guess, the longest. I went to high school there and stuff.
Gotcha.
And so after that, after high school, I went to Western Carolina and bounced around, working odd jobs, living in Greensboro for a while.
Did you finish at Carolina?
I finished at Western, yeah.
Yeah. What'd you get?
I got a BA in, it's like a triple, it was equal parts English, history, political science, and anthropology. It was kind of a hybrid.
That resembles you, Mr. Jones.
Yeah. It doesn't scream construction, but it's funny enough, I was going to try to teach when I got out of college.
Aye.
But in the mid-'70s, you couldn't get a job teaching unless someone died. Those teaching jobs were so sought after. You know, it was a good career,
Right.
relatively well-paying, great benefits, and people just didn't retire until they aged out. So I did my share of substitute teaching and stuff like that. But then I moved out to Missoula, Montana, with a bunch of college guys that I'd known. They were already out there, and I came out. One of them needed their car out, so I drove their car out and then spent a couple of years out there. And just kind of odd jobbing it for a while. Then I got a job in a lumber yard as a laborer, but it was a Teamster shop. So after X amount of weeks, I was in the Teamsters Union, and I drove a big rig doing deliveries for timber, and we had a truss plant. We'd deliver trusses all over,
Right.
Sort of within 50 miles of Missoula, that kind of a thing. And then I moved back to North Carolina in like 77, and I'd always done construction in high school during the summers and in college. And so to make money, I just went back to construction, and I hooked up with a general contractor I'd worked with in high school, and I spent probably about 3 months in Shelby doing that. And then my brother-in-law said, "Hey, my roommate from Carolina is a builder in Golden Valley, and they're looking for some carpenters." And so I called him up, and his name was Pete Link, and he and Jeff Slaughter were partners in doing residential construction. So the job I was on, I took off at lunch and went up there. They were doing an addition up in Boiling Springs. I met with them, and they said, "Yeah, okay, you're hired." It was like not much of an interview. So I went back, and I think I worked like a week's notice, and then came back and worked with those guys. And let me backtrack a little bit. My experience building scenery was Earl Owensby had called Pete. They were in a jam to finish a set that had to, and we worked all weekend on it for a film he was doing called Living Legend, where he plays the Elvis character,
Right.
named Eli,
Yes.
something or another. And so we went to Earl Soundstage, and we finished up building a hotel room. And it was French doors. All we did was take 3/4 plywood and just cut out the holes and stood it in the opening. They put shears over it, backlit it, and boom, and that kind of a thing. And that's the only set construction I've ever done working with those guys or in the Earlosphere.
Right.
They continued. In fact, they up to a certain point they'd built sets for all of Earl's movies at one point or another, but they also kept residential work going on.
Right.
And
kept it both going. Yes.
And Jeff would usually do the residential work, and Pete would do the film work. And so that's how I got hooked up with them and how I got hooked up with Jeff. And then when, and we stayed in touch over the years, but once Firestarter landed here and he came with it and then had decided to move here. We were living in Asheville at the time by then, and I was, working residential construction, and it was just hard to even get 40 hours a week with the weather and everything. So I contacted him about once it was clear they were going to move down here and get started, if there'd be any availability for employment. He says, in typical Jeff fashion, he says, well, if you're living here and I'm hiring, I'll give you a job.
He speaks the truth.
Yeah. So anyway, we moved here.
Y'all moved here.
We moved here in, I want to say it was late March, early April of '84. And it was, we'd come down for a weekend and kind of looked things over, and then had decided, we're going to make the move. And then we came back again to look for a place to live, which was, we'd been on probably several years of, renting places for like $100 a month, $150 a month. And the place we were in Asheville was $100 a month. And it was a little A-frame out in the country in Arden. And so we came down here and we're looking at stuff, and it's like, whoa, it was $400 and $500 a month. I said, what is going on? Plus, the housing market was really tight. We couldn't find anything. And so we were riding around, and I saw a guy bringing some debris out of a house, throwing it in the back of a pickup truck. And so we just pulled up in the driveway, and I walked up there and introduced myself. And
wow.
He introduced himself. His name was Sam Brown. He was a mechanic for Piedmont Airlines. He lived here. He was on the very first Piedmont flight ever. It originated in Wilmington.
That's correct.
And flew to Cincinnati, Ohio.
Wow.
But he was had decided to dip his toes into rental property. He had bought this house over in Pine Grove Drive, and he was doing some fixing up on it. And I said, well, when's it going to be ready? And he says, well, 1st of April was my plan. I said, do you have a tenant yet? And he said, no. And I said, well, would you consider? And so anyway, we made a deal for $325 a month, and we're going, wow, how are we going to make $325 a month?
Goodness gracious.
And so anyway, so we went back to Asheville. We loaded up and headed back down.
One of my very first landlords was a Piedmont pilot.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Guy on the Wooster House at 3rd and Dock. That's
I
where my
loved
first
Piedmont
apartment was.
Airlines. Yeah, they were great.
So I guess those were maybe the breadwinners too at that time.
Oh,
the
for sure.
Airline pilots.
Yeah.
Industry. I think the first time I remember meeting you was on the back lot. I think during No Mercy. I didn't realize you were in town that early.
Yeah.
And,
I'd done. We did a lot of upfit in this building, and then I started on Cat's Eye when we actually got up and running, building scenery, and we helped outfit the stages. In fact, the construction crew that was working for Jeff we did the insulation and the drywall inside of stage 3. That was our first soundproofed sort of stage. And someone ran the day crew, and I ran the night crew. And it was me and Chet Spear and 2 or 3 others, and a guy named Bob No. And we would come in at 6 p.m. every day, and we would insulate and hang sheetrock until 6 a.m. the next morning. And we did that for, I can't remember for how long. And then they came in and they painted it black, and they sprayed that cellulose, the soundproofing on there. And then we started building sets after that. And then I was drafted to work on Year of the Dragon with Vic Simpson when he started that film. And then
as a carpenter or as a foreman?
I was a lead carpenter.
Carpenter.
It was a different setup. You had a carpenter, a lead carpenter, and then a foreman, and then there weren't like a dozen foremen like there are now, and everybody was sort of, you made your deal however much you could make it. There was no pay scale established at that time. So I went in. I was the lead guy for the local crew on the back lot. I had an English foreman, Mick Law, was over me. And so they had another English foreman, Dave Bubb, who was over the stage work. And then they brought in an total Italian crew who built a set on stage, what is now stage 6, that they were chisels, handsaws, and hammers.
Was that the Chinese restaurant?
No, this was it was someone's apartment.
Gotcha.
The Chinese restaurant was the local crew.
That was on stage 5.
That was on 5, the Shanghai Palace.
Yes.
Yeah. So we did that, and then, after Year of Dragon wrapped, kind of shut down for a few months.
Oh, it definitely shut down.
I was
there's no doubt it shut down.
I was out for maybe 3 months or so. I worked for a contractor on Ballhead Island building houses, and then Jeff called me in we built the first guard shack, and then
when they moved it to the other side.
It's kind of where it is now.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Started out on the,
on
the
and
other
then,
side of the building.
I got sent out to Dino's house. I did about 6 or 8 months out there.
Wow.
Out of over the 2 years that it took to build that house. Yeah, because it was a cavalcade of different people cycling in and out of that. And I would contact Jeff. I said, hey, man, people out in the studio are getting 60, 70 hours a week, and we're stuck on 50 hours a week out here. And he says, well, you're in the best place you can possibly be. And I said, okay. But it was a great gig because you got to go to the beach every day. You were on the first floor, then the second floor, and then the third floor, and so the scenery.
And that was a prime part of the beach for the kids hanging out.
You were oceanfront on Asheville Street.
Yeah.
And at that time, Dino's house, I think, was the biggest residence built on the beach.
And that section of Wrightsville Beach, that's where all the college kids lived.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day.
And so we were oceanfront, and then you had Asheville Street, and then to the south was a house that Martha and Dino rented.
Right.
And they lived there while their house was being built. So they'd come in periodically, and they'd walk through the house, make changes or make notes.
Right.
No, we don't like this. We don't like that. So an amazing amount of rebuilding went on during the building of that house because they had a designer who designed what the house wanted to look like. But then they had to have a local architect actually make it into construction engineering reality.
With oceanfront code.
Yeah, that and just as far as the engineering goes, the loads and the spans and all that kind of stuff. A guy named George Alsina was the local guy who was a super guy. Yeah. So then I got back out here for No Mercy. That was my first gig back on the lot.
That's when I first met. So you were exiled to paradise.
I was at the beach
while I was figuring out the business here on the lot,
and everything else was going on here. They had Raw Deal was going on, trucks, which was Maximum Overdrive.
Maximum Overdrive.
Silver Bullet. Not actually, Silver Bullet had already been made, and Maria had already been made, and
Manhunter was kicking in.
Manhunter, and then so I got a call to come back, and I started in as the lead with my local lead with the guys. They brought a coordinator and a foreman from California for No Mercy.
So when the studio shut down, that's when Dino was going public. That's when he went from North Carolina Film Corporation to DEG as a public company. They
started in the spring of '85. I think it actually became DEG. They did their initial public offering and raised their hundreds of millions or whatever.
Yeah, but during that break, were you still working on the house, or did the house shut down too during that break?
No, I was. That's when after Year of the Dragon, I was off for probably about 3 months. And then when I came back, we did the guardhouse. I went to Dino's house, and then went to No Mercy.
Gotcha.
So,
and during the, I came down. My first job was Marie. as a
true story.
A true story.
Yeah.
Landed as a set dresser. You know, I'll tell you, one of my favorite stories that was Fred Thompson's first acting role, and I'm playing himself.
Yeah.
And we built a courthouse here on stage 2 or 3, a little courtroom.
Yeah.
And I'm in there at 6 a.m. in the morning, dusting, cleaning. We're going to
Sure.
shoot that day. In walks Fred Thompson with a briefcase, you know, and he sits up at his table as he'd be the prosecutor. I don't know which role he played. He was Marie's counsel. But he sets his briefcase up there, and he's kind of sitting around looking around, and he looks at me and says, "Son, what's your name?" John Kretschmer says, "Well, what do you do here?" So, "Well, I'm a set dresser." He said, says, "What's a set dresser do?" I said, "Well, see, I'm cleaning the set, getting it ready, making sure everything's there." He says, well, I got some paperwork here, you know, that was from the actual trial." And said, "If I wanted to get that copied, you know, could you take care of that for me?" I said, "Yes, sir. I'd be happy to take that." So so he gave me the actual files from the actual trial. And he says, "You know, you can just give me back the copies, you know, don't worry about it. You know, if it's yellow paper, whatever, maybe give it back." And so that was my first meeting with Fred Thompson. I went off and copied all the actual paperwork, presented it to Tantar, who was like, "Holy smokes, you know, this is a great prop." And then and we went about our way.
Yeah, that's cool.
Amazing. Army Wives. You started Army Wives with me, right?
I did, yeah.
And because I remember driving into Charleston one night to interview, and you and Linwood Taylor were on the sidewalk.
Well, what happened, Barbara had called me and said, "I'm going to Charleston for a couple of days. Would you come and help look at some stage space?" And she asked about an art director to come along too. So I suggested Linwood. So he and I drove down together, and then we met. And you know, Barbara being Barbara, we walk into the lobby of the was it Mills Brothers? Mills something.
Mill House.
Yeah.
Mills House Hotel, the fancy hotel.
The fancy hotel. So we meet her in the lobby after having just driven down there, and immediately she takes us to a private room to show us the pilot. It's not, "Hey, hello, how are you?" "Hey, you got to watch the pilot." So we sit down and watch the pilot and get out, and then I think by that time we'd gotten our rooms, and we were walking out to go grab a bite to eat, and you come driving up right in front. I said, "Hey, we know that guy from somewhere."
Yeah.
So,
I think Linwood had been with me in Florence.
he had been, yeah.
Yeah, we were doing the Strangers up there.
Yeah.
You know, and that was one of my first experiences that's become very common now. And again, here we are at CineSpace Wilmington in the historic stages that have been here for 4 decades. But what became the new norm is we're going to build our stages as we're building our scenery. You know, move into a warehouse and
multitask. Yeah.
And that was the first experience. I remember we looked at several, and we ended up in that cardboard box factory.
The box factory, yeah. Which, you know, as Linwood pointed out, it had the sort of climate of a wine cellar. It was so well insulated from the outside. On any given day, it would feel kind of the same temperature, whether it was a winter, summer, spring, or fall. Of course, Lloyd Ahern made sure that the stages were at 58 degrees at call every morning.
Right.
And so that was pretty funny.
Yeah, because it had a built-up roof, which was important.
And that was also, it let us off the hook as far as sound went. As rain, when it rained, you didn't have to worry about the sound of the rain.
Which is where, you know, you do this in Atlanta a lot of times. You end up in these warehouses, and they're basically rolls of paper towels over wire mesh. That's about all the roof is, you know, just barely a snow load.
Yeah.
And that's all you get.
Not having to put hog's hair on them, and I've done that on a few shows, yeah.
But I called it, I became to call it 40 days and 40 nights, you know, because within about 40 days, not only have you built your scenery, you built the infrastructure to turn this warehouse into a sound stage and your rolling film.
Yeah.
You know, in Charlotte, when they gave us the keys to an empty warehouse, and 5 weeks later, we were rolling film.
Right.
That
was on Homeland, right?
On Homeland.
Yeah. I shot in that stage on a film called Paper Towns. We assumed some of the Homeland scenery, and they were scrapping the rest of it. But those end up being pretty good spaces.
So what is your, as you recall, is your favorite project in terms of when you were handed a script? What was the one that most got you excited?
Well, script-wise, I really was drawn to Secret Life of Bees because it was a really good novel, and the screenplay was faithful to the novel, and it was well written. And it was during the writer's strike, so it was one of the few things actually going on. And that's just in terms of the storytelling. Right. There are other shows that were certainly more fun and exciting and stimulating from a construction and art department standpoint.
Right.
But I'd say that just from totally a script and a storytelling standpoint was probably my favorite.
Did the production hold up to your expectations?
Well, it was, and whoever hears this hears it, but it was a Fox Searchlight film.
Right.
That had been backed very in a very lukewarm way. The head of production did not want the film made, but Lauren Schuler Donner did, and her name was attached to it. So they said, okay, go ahead. We're going to give you $12 million. If it tanks, no big deal. If it's a success, I look like a hero because I spent $12 million on and made all this money.
Right.
So we started off with, everybody starts off late. We're doing a summer in South Carolina in January in Wilmington. That's the first thing we were up against.
You're definitely going to need an art department.
Well, we had an art department, but we didn't have money.
Oh.
And we had, in fact, the Greens department was the first department to start because we took a house out in Watha as what was called the pink house in the story. And so they had to start doing the winter rye and watering it so that we have green grass. And then we built a peach orchard outside of Bladenboro, out in the country on this farm. Same thing. It was dead of winter, and we had to paint the house, the inside, the outside of the house. And being the strike, I had 5 head painters as our paint department.
Holy cow.
That was pretty amazing if you looked at the lineup.
Right.
Everybody from Paul Oliver to James Oñate,
Larry Shepard,
Chris Holcomb, and Peter Duran.
Good heavens.
They were the top 5. Then we had other painters too. But anyway, that part was really cool.
And I think I'll tell you what, it's totally cool because Wilmington is that kind of community where these guys can all work together and play together.
Yeah. There was no pissing contest. It was all.
That speaks very well to our community here.
Yeah. Let's get it done. And so we built this. The Greens Department had bought wax myrtle trees, small ones, stripped all the vegetation off of them, and they had bought mango sprays, silks, because they somewhat resembled peach trees. So that was the orchard, and then they got styrofoam peaches from wherever and tied those on there. And they had a few real peaches in the foreground and stuff like that. And once again, you have to remember we were filming in January, February,
right.
All this stuff. And when we got to the pink house to shoot the exteriors, they're going out and they're playing in the sprinkler. Kids are.
Oh no!
And they're doing like snow angels in the grass. And where we couldn't get grass, we ended up having to paint the lawns, and so the paint was coming off on people's costumes and stuff like that. And just, it was just one of those things where so many things went against.
Right.
And intuitively,
Right.
it was the wrong time of year, the wrong place.
Right.
But it was driven by schedule and actor availability, and it all worked out really good. But the time up in Watha was pretty unusual. I was driving up there one morning, up I-40. I had my old Ford pickup truck, and I'm doing probably 70, 75 miles an hour. And I see a dot in my rearview mirror, and it gets really big, really fast. And it's a black dot.
Oh,
and
no.
It's coming. And it's Queen Latifah passing me at well over 100 miles an hour.
Wow.
And she had the big Mercedes sedan, whatever that number is, a
500, yeah.
And she had a driver, but she liked to drive. So the driver was sitting in the passenger seat, and she was driving. So the very next day, I didn't see her that day coming or going, but she got a ticket doing like 115 or something in a 70.
Nice.
So, and I don't think she played the card, don't you know who I am, or any of that stuff, She took her lumps, and I'm sure that she got out of it in some way or another,
Sure.
Either through fines or...
North Carolina has a great system. If you get a speeding ticket, you get 10 letters in the mail from lawyers.
Oh, yeah.
You throw them up in the air, catch one, and you call them up and send them a check, and it goes away.
It goes away, yeah. It's going to be something like improper equipment.
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah. I love that. I like it.
You get a fine, you get a court cost, and then you keep walking.
In Army Wives, I got a ticket, in South Carolina somewhere, and I was like, well, where's my lawyer? Nope, no, you got to show up.
Yeah.
In South Carolina. So
Somebody's got to show up.
You just need to show up. I'll take care of it.
But anyway, you had Queen Latifah up there. You had Jennifer Hudson, Alicia Keys were all in the cast. And the three of them being superstars already. Jennifer Hudson maybe not so much by that time, but they were all had firm footings in their own careers. And they would just, be joking around and do a little sing-song this or that, just hanging out. But they were all so gracious and very friendly. And it was a kind of a budget run operation. And there was no one grandstanding about my trailer or this or that.
Right.
We had catering was set up in the Watha Community Center, and that's where base camp was. And it was very, and that was another part that what I really liked beside the script. It was the people that were, the crew and the cast, face forward and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of making a movie the wrong time of year, Summer Catch.
Yeah.
Which you built for me, a show I designed.
Yeah.
And what an amazing undertaking. And I'll just start with, I got hired to do the job, and I think probably in February. And
Yeah.
we're going to shoot Summer Catch. We're going to shoot Summer for Summer. Because, by the way, if you watch Bull Durham, they shot that in fall, and there's, you can see the vapor coming out of the pitcher's mouth when he's getting ready to pitch. So, no, we're going to shoot in the summer. Try to find a baseball field in the summer. They're booked. They're busy, so we decided we're going to build one from scratch.
On a recreational field, yeah. And you learn something on every film. Besides learning about baseball, it was about grass.
Yeah.
And the determining factor for success on that was the nighttime temperature in the spring of whether that grass was gonna go in time or not. We started off with overseeded Bermuda, and then as the winter rye died down, the Bermuda took off. So we just hit it at the right time.
I remember it was all about faith.
Yeah,
we're looking,
it was a total crapshoot.
And because we're looking at brown grass, and we're looking at Herb Gaines and Michael Tolan.
And that Herb Gaines' brow, that
it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it turned out beautifully. I think the movie's okay, but that was a damn good baseball diamond.
Yeah. And
top notch.
And that scene, that aerial scene coming over the waterway.
Right.
That aerial coming over the I mean,
Yeah.
that's magic.
I scouted that in an airplane.
Yeah.
I talked them into letting me go up in an airplane.
Right. I remember you showed me photos of that. Yeah.
And I think I shot video. I think
Yeah.
I shot that shot.
Yeah, you probably did.
Because the most interesting thing about our baseball diamond in Southport, north of the Cape Cod diamond, that we
Copying the
yeah.
Chatham A's.
Yeah, Chatham A's. And I think I gave Michael Tolan, I gave him an aerial shot of the Chatham A's diamond.
Mm-hmm.
And then about time he went to camera, I replaced it with this matching aerial shot of our diamond.
No, the coastline was key.
And I do remember, I think after you got all the sod laid, we needed rain.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have the radar shot of this giant front of rain that came in the day you finished laying the sod.
Mm-hmm.
And that also helped in our...
We did end up we did put in irrigation because we had to have, water for a long time after that. But yeah, that was key to get it in and start watering it right away. Yeah, that was really good. And a lot of good things happened on that show, just the timing wise. The schedule worked out, and they brought in the Musco lights for our for the athletic field lighting. That was huge. And after we built the other sets, the bar interior, and then a couple of other things, Herb didn't want us to carry a crew during all the filming of the baseball scenes, which was over 3 weeks.
Right.
So we, asked everybody to take a seat, to sit on the bench for a while. And every day, myself, Roger Scruggs, Brian Contz, and Bill Collins, our medic, and Paul Davis, our teamster, were the only. We came in every morning. We went to the field. We dressed the field. We rechalked the lines if it needed it, depending on continuity.
Right.
Drag the infield, and then we would take some BP just to have, get a little exercise in. But we were working a lot of days. We were barefooted out there.
Oh, that's great.
Just getting our job done, and then once. And this is when the shooting crew was working splits or later.
And
sometimes.
a lot of nighttime baseball in summer catch.
So we'd hang till they got there, and then make sure everything's good.
I wasn't briefed properly on this subject.
Between the first Turtles movie and Elmo and Grouchland, I'd say art department wise, we're probably the most challenging A and the most fun B. And being able to work with the Henson Group was amazing. I was fortunate enough to meet Jim Henson in whatever office hub is over in the front at the beginning of production for the first Turtles. He just came into town to check it out, and hell of a nice guy. He had an old floppy hat and old Baton Rouge Cajun. I don't know if he's Cajun or not, but that's where he hailed from.
The way you swing.
Yeah, and just hell of a nice guy, and just checking things out. And then he went on about his business.
Wow.
But the sort of R&D to go into building the tunnels that were a compound radius,
right?
Which we'd built a lot of shapes before, but these all had to be bricked also. So it was the whole thing was just built in strips of wood, so we could bend them, and then piece in, kind of like boat building.
Gotcha.
Because you can go horizontally for a point, and then it starts getting off. Then you've got to fit it in. And George Simcox and the plaster crew, they had half a dozen different brick templates to work off of.
Wow.
To make the plaster brick. And then we had to fiberglass the bottom of the tunnels. We put two flat surfaces together to make a V so they could skateboard on them.
Right.
But also flood them to the point where they could recirculate the water and just keep it going. So we had a recirculating tank outside the stage and just kept feeding that. That was Joe Digitano, effects guy, did that, and it was pretty magic, you know. And Scott Davis was, I think, that was my first show as a coordinator, and it may have been his first show as a key grip.
I believe it was.
And so a lot of neophytes, but we all had a lot of background. So
Right.
it wasn't like it was your first rodeo. You were just in a different chair.
Yeah.
And
I think that marked an era in Wilmington where we truly, our native workforce was as good as any in the world.
Yeah.
Had all the techniques that London had, any and all the techniques that Los Angeles had. And I think the professionalism and the exactness that New York. So,
yeah, I would agree. And had a great art department, Roy Smith,
yeah.
which was like we always called him the Splinter. You know, in the story, Splinter's the old rat, and that was our nickname for him, was Splinter, because he resembled him in some way. He was tall and lanky, and I think about it, him being old, because during the first Turtles he had his 60th birthday. I'm going, this guy's really old. I'm going, wait a minute. I'm older than he is now. So,
How about that?
yeah.
But I'm only 34 in dog years.
Yeah,
and
that's
I'm
right.
holding. Roy he kept a sailboat on the back a lot, I think, too. He was working on a sailboat.
He was doing something, but he and I went sailing one day. My friend Jimmy Dean, who had a couple of sailboats, he was going to take us on an outing, and he injured his back. So Roy and I went out with Becky and his girlfriend Donna, and had it was quite a comedy of errors. We never got outside of Banks Channel, but
Right.
we went up and down a few times.
Little monohull.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a little 25-foot, like a
As
Catalina.
I recall, he had one on the back that he was working
Yeah.
on the whole time he was
Yeah.
here. And I had it parked up back.
So anyway, and that was fun. Gary Wisner, art director,
Right.
Karen Stewart, and we had George Simcox run the plaster shop, and just a great crew. But the thing we'd had, which is a dying breed, is we had prep time.
Right.
We had over, I want to say, maybe 10 weeks of prep,
Wow.
which is unheard of anymore.
Right.
Because you're creating a world that doesn't exist. Plus, we had to revamp the back lot, which was
Right.
no small feat.
Yeah.
And it was, by that time, that was 89, so had 5 years on it. So it was
Right.
starting to show a lot of wear and tear. So we had to do a lot of work to safety it up, because
Right.
it was kind of a hodgepodge.
And
by
get it back
then.
to New York.
And get it back to New York.
New York
yeah.
City for
Yeah.
for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
I mentioned George Simcox and plaster. The history of plaster here. The trade we learned very much from the English. And I think when Les Dilly came back through maybe a second or third time to Wilmington for Black Knight,
Yeah.
I was lobbying for an art director job.
Yeah.
And he says, John, I can't hire you as an art director. He said, but you need to go work in plaster.
Yeah.
You need to learn plaster. And that was an amazing chore for me. I made it to gang boss.
Yeah. Yeah.
I learned the craft, and to this day, I benefit from that knowledge.
For sure. Yeah.
It's a beautiful form. You can shape it any way you want, and it takes paint lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. When we'd started Year of the Dragon, that was the whole birth of the plaster industry. Ken Powell, who was the head of the department, and then he brought probably 6 guys with him from England, and they hired all the locals. Had no hidden agenda, so they taught them everything. As I like to say, I taught you everything you know, but not everything I know. But they imparted a lot of knowledge to the local crew, which carried on for decades.
Carried
after
on.
that.
It certainly showed up on the Abyss.
Yeah,
And,
for sure. Yeah.
And certainly Black Knight was a total exploitation in plaster.
Well,
Here.
when I touched on the Hensons, when we did Elmo and Grouchland, we built we copied the Sesame Street set, kind of verbatim, and we put that on stage 7. And then we built Grouchtown, which was a total
discombobulated world.
Everything is upside down, backwards. It's like if you
exactly.
built a set and you dropped it from about 30 feet, and however it landed. But we built things in Muppet scale. So George and them built like 2 or 3 different forms of reduced size brick, and then made molds from those, and then made skins from those. So we had buildings, with so many varied size bricks, but they were Muppet scale, along with the doors and the windows and everything else. And when shooting that set, one of the most sort of chaotic and cacophonous things you've ever seen is when you have the puppet operators are down on the ground.
Right.
They're on the floor. We built these things called Muppet carts, and you have a little dolly with your monitor on it, because you're watching what the camera sees. So you're operating above your head, and a lot of them were voicing their own puppets. So some of them had on mics,
Headsets.
They had on headsets, and then you had extras, because there were a lot. It was a town, so it wasn't just the principal players. There were all these other puppets in there. So when you stand back from that, you see the set, which starts at about 4 feet off the ground,
Right.
and then you see like 25 people down below that with their carts and their monitors and their gear.
Right.
And this is not wireless. So you had cable out the yin yang, video cable, audio cable,
Oh my goodness.
just a sea of it.
Like 25 monitors.
Yeah. And you've got,
my goodness.
and then
Oh my goodness.
all these people doing this and that, and it's just like, but if you put a line here, and you don't see the below 4 feet, it's beautiful. And then below that is just absolute chaos.
The underworld.
Yeah.
The underworld
Yeah.
of the Muppets.
Yeah.
Wow, what a nice interview, John. I just appreciate where you guys went. It was beautiful.
Well, I think the audience got to know a little bit about the amazing Tom Jones, formerly known as the Reverend, to me now known as the Doctor, and the Doctor's in for sure.
And going to be impossible to live with.
Yeah, and then what a blessing to be able to work with the Muppets, which many people in New Wellington got that experience.
The Muppets and the Turtles. So
Yeah.
the Hensons have been here a lot.
And up next is an amazing gentleman, Chuck Potter, set decorator who hailed from Mississippi and came through Wilmington on his way to New York. And guess what? He came back.
Oh my gosh. So that's Chuck Potter next time, and we're calling that show.
Chuck, we need more bubbles. More bubbles.
I'm Scott Davis with John Kretschmer. Be kind, everybody.
Rap Beer is created and written by Scott Davis and John D. Kretschmer. The theme music's provided by Turbo Pro Project. This one-of-a-kind podcast is recorded at the historic screening room at Cinespace Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina. Copyright Bluffco Industry 2024.